She signed away everything. She walked out with nothing. And then the most feared man in the city stepped off a private jet. For her. If you've ever been underestimated, written off, or left behind by someone who thought your silence meant you had nothing left, this story is for you. Stay until the very end, because what Elena Vaughn built in the dark will make your jaw drop. And if this story hits you somewhere deep, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The morning of the divorce hearing, Elena Vaughn woke up at 4:43. Not because of an alarm, she hadn't set one. She woke up the way she always did now, suddenly, completely, her body pulling itself out of sleep before her mind had any say in the matter. She lay still for a moment in the narrow bed of the apartment on Crestfield Avenue, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that she'd been meaning to report to the building manager for 6 weeks. The radiator ticked in the corner. Outside, the city made its low, indifferent noise, a truck grinding through gears, a dog barking twice, and then going quiet. She didn't move for a full minute. Then she sat up, swung her legs over the side of the bed, and pressed both feet flat against the cold floor. That was something her mother had taught her back when Elena was small and prone to morning panic before school. Put your feet on the ground. Feel that you're still here. She was still here. The apartment was 460 square feet, which was a thing she had chosen deliberately. After 12 years in the Cross Estate on Meridian Hill, a house with 11 bedrooms, a wine cellar, a staff of 8, and hallways long enough that you could go an entire day without seeing your husband, Elena had rented the smallest unit available in the first decent building she'd found. She didn't want space. She wanted to know exactly where she was at all times. She put the kettle on and stood at the kitchen window while the water heated. The neighborhood below was still mostly asleep. A woman in scrubs walked quickly toward the bus stop with her head down. A man was hosing something off the sidewalk in front of the bodega across the street, the water catching the orange of the streetlights as it ran toward the drain. Elena watched all of it and felt the particular kind of calm that only comes from having already made your worst decision. She had already signed. 3 days ago, in the offices of Hargrove and Tallis on the 42nd floor of the Sutton building, she had sat across from Adrian's team of 6 attorneys and signed 41 pages of settlement documents. She had not argued. She had not made counter-demands. She had reviewed every page with her reading glasses on and her coffee going cold beside her, and she had signed her name in the same even script she'd used since she was 16, and she had handed the pages back without comment. Adrian's lead attorney, a tall woman named Briscoe, who wore her confidence the way other people wore expensive jewelry, had barely been able to hide her satisfaction. At one point, she had glanced across at Elena's single legal representative, a quiet, older man named Gerald Fitch, who had come out of semi-retirement as a personal favor. And the look on Briscoe's face was almost pity. Almost. Elena had seen it. She had said nothing. The kettle clicked off. She poured hot water over the tea bag and carried the mug to the small table by the window where her daughter's drawing was taped to the wall. Sophie had made it 2 weeks ago at school. A house with a yellow sun and 2 figures standing in front of it, one tall and one small. The tall one had curly lines around her head, which was how Sophie drew her mother's hair. Elena looked at it every morning. Sophie was 7. She was currently staying with Elena's older sister in Dunmore, a 2-hour drive north, where she had her own room and a yard and a dog named Brutus who slept on the foot of her bed and apparently snored. Sophie had called the night before and told Elena, very seriously, that Brutus had eaten one of her socks. "Which sock?" Elena had asked. "The striped one." "The good striped one?" "Yes," Sophie had said, with the gravity of someone reporting a genuine catastrophe. Elena had laughed. It was the first real laugh she'd produced in 10 days, and it left her throat feeling strange afterward, like a muscle that had gone too long without use. She drank her tea and got dressed. The courthouse was a 40-minute subway ride and a 6-block walk from Crestfield Avenue. Elena left early. She always left early. She'd learned in the years she spent navigating Adrian's world of last-minute schedule changes and moving goalposts that being early was the only form of control that couldn't be taken from you. She arrived at the Hartwell County Civil Courthouse at 7:15, nearly 2 hours before the 9 o'clock hearing. The building's stone facade caught the flat gray light of the October morning and gave nothing back. A few pigeons worked the steps. A maintenance worker was replacing a bulb in one of the exterior fixtures, standing on a ladder that wobbled slightly every time he shifted his weight. Elena went through security, declined the offer of the elevator from a court officer who must have assumed she looked lost, and found the third-floor corridor where hearing room 14C was located. She sat in a wooden chair outside the closed doors and opened the book she'd brought, a battered paperback copy of a novel she'd read twice before and found reliable, and read the same paragraph 4 times before giving up and setting it in her lap. The hallway was quiet. A court clerk came out of an office down the hall, looked at her, looked away. Somewhere below, a door banged shut. Elena sat with her hands folded on top of the closed book and watched the light change in the high windows across from her. She thought about the box. It was a gray archival box, the kind you could buy at any office supply store, currently sitting on the floor of Gerald Fitch's car in the parking structure 2 blocks away. Inside the box were folders, and inside the folders were documents, printed emails, corporate filing records, certified bank transfer statements, loan guarantee agreements, organized chronologically and cross-referenced by a paralegal named Dana Osei, who had spent 48 hours going through them with the focused intensity of someone diffusing something. The documents had taken Elena 11 months to collect. She had started the month after Sophie's 5th birthday, when she'd been clearing out the top shelf of the storage room in the Meridian Hill house and found behind a stack of Adrian's old college textbooks a manila folder she didn't recognize. Inside it was a set of financial guarantee agreements, her signature on the bottom of each page, her name on every legal obligation line. She had not signed them. She had stood in that storage room for a long time, holding the folder, listening to the sound of the house around her, the hum of the HVAC system, a television playing somewhere, the distant noise of the ground's crew outside, and she had understood, in the careful, methodical way she understood things, exactly what she was looking at. Adrian had signed her name. He had forged her signature on binding financial documents that made her personally liable for a real estate development project called Calder South, a mixed-use tower development on the edge of the warehouse district that had been struggling with permitting delays and cost overruns for 2 years. If the project failed, Elena would be legally exposed. Not Adrian, not the company, her, personally. She had put the folder back exactly where she found it. She had gone downstairs and poured a glass of water and stood at the kitchen island for a very long time. Then she had called Gerald Fitch. Gerald had been her professor in the 1 law school semester she'd completed before marrying Adrian. He was 71 now, retired from practice, spending his time teaching a single seminar course at a university across the city and tending a garden he talked about with slightly embarrassing affection. He had answered on the second ring, and when she told him what she had found, he had been quiet for long enough that she thought the call had dropped. Then he said, very carefully, "Don't touch anything else. Don't mention it to anyone. Come see me this week." She had. The next 11 months were the quietest Elena had ever lived. Adrian filed for divorce in February, citing irreconcilable differences, which was the kind of clean legal language that obscured the more complicated truth. That the marriage had been functionally over for years, maintained past its natural end by Elena's reluctance to disrupt Sophie's life and Adrian's practical need for a wife whose presence lent a particular kind of respectability to the cross-public image. She was appropriate. She was composed. She was exactly the kind of woman you wanted photographed beside you at charity galas, attractive without being threatening, educated without being inconvenient. When he filed, she did not contest it. When his attorneys proposed a settlement that gave her a monthly support payment for 2 years, the apartment they were renting for her as a temporary measure, and a trust account for Sophie, she reviewed it and agreed to it without negotiation. Driscoll, she later learned from Gerald, had reportedly told a colleague afterward that it was the easiest high-value divorce she'd ever handled. Meanwhile, Elena went to the library. Not figuratively. She had applied for and gotten a part-time position at the Crestfield branch of the public library system, sorting returns, helping patrons with the catalog system, and running the twice-weekly after-school reading group for kids between the ages of 6 and 10. The pay was modest. The hours were predictable. The work was honest in a way that required nothing from her except attention, and she gave it that. She also, 3 mornings a week before her shift, sat in Gerald Fitch's kitchen on the other side of the city while Dana Osei spread documents across the kitchen table and walked her through what they had. It was more than Elena had expected. The forged guarantee agreements were the original discovery, but they were not the only problem. Over the course of the Calder South project, Adrian had restructured the development's debt twice. Once by bringing in outside investors whose identities were obscured through a series of holding companies, and once by renegotiating the construction loans using collateral that he didn't have the unilateral authority to pledge. Elena's name appeared on several of the secondary guarantee documents. The legal exposure was substantial. What complicated things further, and this was the part that had kept Gerald quiet for a long time when Dana first walked him through it, was the identity of one of the outside investors. The holding company that had come into the Calder South deal in its second financing round was called Verano Capital Partners. Verano Capital Partners was, according to the public record, a real estate investment vehicle incorporated in Delaware with offices in 3 cities. What the public record did not show, but what a very careful trace of corporate relationships eventually revealed, was that Verano Capital Partners was connected, through several layers of properly incorporated and tax-compliant entities, to the financial interests of a man named Damian Vescari. When Gerald had told Elena this, he'd watched her face carefully. She hadn't looked alarmed. She'd looked like she was recalculating something. "You know who he is," Gerald said. "Everyone knows who he is," Elena said. Damian Vescari was 53 years old. He was the son of a Sicilian-born businessman who had come to the city with $40 and a reputation that preceded him like a weather system. The father had built something, the son had expanded it, legitimized parts of it, and developed a public profile that occupied a strange position somewhere between genuine business success and a kind of unspoken understanding that there were things he controlled that didn't appear on any balance sheet. He served on 2 hospital boards. He had donated the wing of a children's museum. He was photographed at fundraisers and film openings, and occasionally at City Hall, always immaculately dressed, always calm. He was also, by the understanding of everyone who operated in the city's financial and political world, the single most dangerous man you could choose to have as an enemy. Adrian had taken his investment money and then forged obligations onto a woman whose name Viscari's people had presumably noticed in the documents. "He hasn't done anything," Dana said carefully. "The investment is properly structured. Everything on his side is clean." "For now," Gerald said. Elena had looked at the stack of folders on the kitchen table and said, "When does Calder South run out of runway?" Dana checked her notes. "Current projections put the next major debt service payment in early October. If they can't refinance by then, the project goes into default." Elena had looked at the calendar on Gerald's kitchen wall. It was the end of July. "Okay, Isita." She said. Bam. She had met Damian Vescari once, briefly, 4 years before the divorce, at a development industry gala that Adrian had brought her to. She remembered him clearly, not because he was physically imposing, though he was, but because of the quality of his stillness. Most powerful men performed their power. They filled rooms with their presence, their voice, their movement. Damian Vescari stood in a room the way a load-bearing wall stood in a building, without announcement, without effort, holding up things you'd only notice if they were gone. They had been introduced in a receiving line and spoken for approximately 90 seconds. Something about the city's waterfront redevelopment proposal, which she'd actually read and had a real opinion on. He had listened to her speak and then said, with a precision that she found oddly respectful, "You've actually looked at the infrastructure appendix." "It's the only part that matters," she'd said. "Most people don't bother. Most people don't plan to be stuck in traffic for the next decade." He had smiled at that, a brief, genuine thing. And then Adrian had appeared at her elbow and steered her away, and that had been the end of it. She had thought about that 90 seconds a number of times in the past 11 months. Not obsessively, but she had thought about it. In late August, 3 weeks before the divorce was set to be finalized, Elena had asked Gerald whether there was any legitimate reason for someone in Damien Vescari's position to be informed about the fraudulent guarantee documents. Gerald had taken a very long time to respond. "You'd be flagging a fraud that directly affects his investment position," he said finally. "That's a legitimate interest. Whether or how he chooses to respond to that information is entirely outside your control or responsibility." "That's not a yes or a no," Elena said. "No," Gerald agreed. "It isn't." She had sent a single, carefully worded letter through a courier service to an address that Gerald's contacts had provided. The letter did not ask for anything. It did not make threats. It described, factually and precisely, the fraudulent guarantee situation and its potential impact on the Calder South investment, and it attached copies of 3 of the most material documents. She had received no response. She had spent 3 weeks not knowing whether that meant anything. The morning of the hearing, Briscoe arrived at 8:45 with 2 associates and a paralegal. She was wearing a charcoal blazer and the expression of someone who had done this many times and found it professionally satisfying. Adrian arrived at 8:50, flanked by Briscoe and moving the way he always moved in professional spaces, with the easy, proprietary confidence of a man who had never walked into a room where he didn't feel at home. He was wearing a suit Elena recognized. It was the navy one he saved for moments he considered important. He glanced at Elena once when he came in. She was already seated at the respondent's table, her hands folded in front of her, wearing the navy coat that she'd bought at a consignment shop 8 months ago because it was warm and looked presentable. He held her gaze for a moment and then looked away, which told her everything she needed to know about how he expected the morning to go. Gerald sat beside her and opened his folder without looking up. "You all right?" he said quietly. "Yes," she said. "You don't have to do this if you've changed your mind." "I haven't changed my mind." He nodded and kept his eyes on his papers. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Dowd, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 50s who had reportedly heard upward of 3,000 divorce proceedings and developed a manner of studied neutrality that concealed, Gerald had told her, an absolutely merciless instinct for detecting waste of the court's time, entered at 9:02. The initial business moved efficiently. Dowd reviewed the settlement terms. She confirmed that both parties had reviewed and signed the agreement. She confirmed that the terms of the Sophie Trust were in order. Briscoe answered questions crisply. Gerald answered the 2 questions directed at him without elaborating. Elena sat still and watched the judge's face and breathed slowly and kept her hands flat on the table. They were 12 minutes from the end. Elena knew this because she'd been told, and because she could feel it, the way a room shifts when something is almost concluded, the papers beginning to be gathered, the pen uncapped. That was when the court clerk's desk phone rang. It was an unusual enough sound, most communication in the courtroom was through tablets and direct channel, that it pulled everyone's attention. The clerk, a young man named Torres, whose name Elena had learned because she'd made a point of learning the names of everyone involved in the proceeding, answered it, listened, and then looked up at Judge Dowd with an expression that he couldn't quite normalize in time. "Your Honor," he said, there's a request for a brief recess from a party connected to the proceeding. They've just arrived. A representative is requesting 2 minutes with the court clerk before proceedings continue." Dowd looked at him over her reading glasses. "A party connected to the proceeding." "Yes, Your Honor." "Not a party of record." "No, Your Honor, but they indicate a direct financial interest in one of the assets under the settlement terms." Dowd set down her pen. She looked at Briscoe. She looked at Gerald. Gerald's face was carefully, professionally neutral. Briscoe's was beginning to tighten at the corners. 5 minutes, Dowd said. "Court is in recess." The double doors at the back of the room opened. Elena did not turn around. She heard the sound of footsteps, measured, unhurried, the kind of footsteps that didn't adjust their pace for anyone. And then the shift in the room's atmosphere, that particular change in pressure that happens when someone enters a space who is carrying genuine weight. She heard very faintly one of Adrian's associates make a small sound. Not quite a word, not quite nothing. She stood up. She turned. Damien Vescari walked into the hearing room of the Hartwell County Civil Courthouse, wearing a dark overcoat over a charcoal suit, his silver-streaked hair neat. his expression arranged into the same precise calm she remembered from 4 years ago. He had two men with him, large, quiet, professionally invisible in the way that personal security is when it's done correctly. He crossed the room without looking at Adrian, without looking at the judge, without looking at any of the attorneys. He looked at Elena. She met his eyes. She said quietly enough that only Gerald could hear her, "He came." Damien stopped 2 steps away from her. He didn't extend a hand. He didn't speak immediately. He looked at her with a directness that felt, in that silent room, almost like a formal acknowledgement, one party recognizing the weight and credibility of another. Then he turned to face the room. And everything in the Hartwell County Civil Courthouse changed. Adrian Cross, for the first time in 12 years of marriage, looked at his ex-wife and felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. It took him a moment to identify it. It was the first cold thread of fear. The recess lasted 11 minutes. It felt longer than that inside hearing room 14C, where the air had changed in a way that had nothing to do with the building's ventilation system. Adrian's lead attorney, Briscoe, had used the first 3 minutes to lean close to her client and speak in a rapid, controlled undertone that Elena, from across the room, could not hear, but could read clearly enough in the set of Briscoe's shoulders and the increasingly rigid stillness of Adrian's jaw. Adrian sat with his hands flat on the table and stared at the middle distance in the particular way that men stare at nothing when they are trying very hard to look like nothing has surprised them. Elena sat on her side of the room with Gerald to her left and did not look at Adrian at all. She was watching Damien Vescari, who stood near the back wall of the courtroom speaking quietly with the court clerk and a man Elena didn't recognize. Someone from the courthouse administration, she guessed, based on the building ID badge clipped to his jacket. Damien spoke without raising his voice or using his hands. The clerk nodded 3 times. The administrator nodded once and left quickly. Damien's 2 security men stood near the doors. They were so still they might have been part of the architecture. "He brought his own attorneys," Gerald said quietly, not looking up from his folder. Elena glanced sideways. She hadn't noticed, but now she saw them. 2 men near the front of the gallery who had come in with Damien's group and were now seated and open laptop quiet, working with the focused efficiency of people who had done this before and weren't interested in theater. "How many?" she said. 2, I can see. There may be more outside." Gerald turned a page in his folder. "This is moving faster than I expected. Is that a problem?" He considered the question seriously before answering. "It depends on whether they're here to support or to control." Elena looked at Damien again. He had finished with the clerk and was now standing near the wall with his hands folded in front of him, not speaking, not looking at anyone in particular. He had the patience of someone who had decided, long ago, that waiting was not a form of submission. "Support," she said. Gerald didn't answer that. Judge Dowd returned to the bench at 9:26 and called the room to order with a single word. She set both hands on the desk in front of her and looked at the room with the expression of a woman who had made peace with the fact that human beings were, as a general rule, committed to making things complicated. "Before we resume," she said, "I've been informed that a motion for temporary stay of the settlement execution has been filed by counsel representing Verano Capital Partners, citing a direct material interest in assets referenced under Schedule C of the settlement agreement." She looked at Briscoe. "Ms. Briscoe, you've had a few minutes. Do you want to tell me why I shouldn't grant this?" Briscoe stood. She was good. Elena would acknowledge that. She stood without hesitation and spoke without referring to notes, which meant she'd been processing quickly and had found a line of argument she felt solid standing on. "Your Honor, Verano Capital Partners is not a named party to this divorce proceeding. Any financial interest they may hold in development assets adjacent to this settlement is a matter for separate civil litigation, not grounds for a stay of a signed and agreed settlement between the actual parties of record." "The guarantee instruments," said one of Damien's attorneys without standing up, just speaking from his seat in a measured, clear voice that cut across Briscoe's rhythm, like a blade through fabric. "Schedule C, subsection 4. The respondent's personal guarantee obligations transferred under this settlement include instruments that were executed under conditions we've flagged as procedurally irregular." Briscoe turned to look at him with an expression that was professionally controlled but contained, at its edges, a flash of something sharper. Counsel, you're not. Counsel is addressing the court, Dowd said with a flatness that ended that particular exchange. She looked at Damien's attorney. Mr. Hartman, Your Honor. Thomas Hartman, retained by Verano Capital Partners. Mr. Hartman, procedurally irregular is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Can you be more specific? Hartman opened a single folder. We have documented evidence that 3 of the personal financial guarantee instruments listed under the respondent's name in this settlement, instruments that would, upon settlement execution, attach as legal obligations to the respondent personally, were originated without the respondent's knowledge or consent. The signatures on those instruments do not match verified exemplars of the respondent's signature. We have engaged a forensic document examiner whose preliminary findings support this. The room was very quiet. Elena looked at her hands on the table. She kept them still. She had rehearsed this moment in her head for months. Not the theater of it, but the experience of it. The weight of the thing finally being said out loud in a room where it had legal consequence, and she had told herself she would feel relief or vindication or something. What she felt was a kind of vibrating stillness, like the moment after a bell has been struck when the sound hasn't yet resolved. She heard Adrian's chair shift. She did not look at him. Your Honor, Briscoe said, and now there was something different in her voice. Not panic, Briscoe was too controlled for panic, but a recalibration happening in real time. These are extraordinary claims that would require substantial verification before they come with documentation, Hartman said. He stood now. He was a shorter man than his voice suggested, compact and precise in a gray suit. He held up a bound folder. We're prepared to submit it to the court. Dowd looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the folder. Then she looked at Elena. Ms. Vaughn. Her voice had changed. Not softer exactly, but more direct, the professional neutrality peeling back just slightly. Are you aware of what's being alleged here? Elena stood. Her voice, when it came, was steady. Yes, Your Honor. Are you prepared to make a statement regarding the guarantee instruments referenced in Schedule C? Yes, Your Honor. I did not sign them. Twats. The stay was granted at 10:15. It was a preliminary stay, limited in scope, specifically targeting the transfer of the guarantee obligations under Schedule C, while the court ordered a forensic document review. The rest of the settlement, the support payments, Sophie's trust, the apartment arrangement remained intact. Dowd was careful to say this twice, and Elena understood that the judge was being precise about what she was protecting and what she was holding. Adrian's team called for a 30-minute adjournment immediately after Dowd left the bench. Elena stayed at her table while Briscoe pulled Adrian to the far corner of the room with the urgent, low-intensity manner of a surgeon who has just found something unexpected during what was supposed to be a routine procedure. Elena could see Briscoe's hands moving, measured, controlled gestures, explaining something. Adrian stood with his arms crossed and his back half turned, which was what he did when he was receiving information he didn't want to receive. Gerald leaned close to Elena. How are you doing? I'm fine. You don't have to be. I know. She paused. I am, though. He studied her for a moment with the particular look he'd perfected over 50 years of watching people in courtrooms. A look that distinguished between people who were fine and people who had simply learned to present the exterior of fine. He apparently decided she qualified as the former because he nodded and went back to his papers. Damien Vescari crossed the room toward her. He moved in the same way he had when he'd entered. No excess motion, no performance. He stopped at the appropriate distance and looked at her with eyes that were a very dark brown, and held in them the kind of steadiness that suggested he had a high tolerance for complicated situations. Mrs. Vaughn, he said. Ms. Vaughn, she said. Since several weeks ago. Something in his expression shifted, not quite a smile, an acknowledgement. Ms. Vaughn? Mr. Vescari? She looked at him directly. Thank you for coming. I had an interest in the outcome. His voice was low, precise, accented only very faintly with something that might have been his father's speech patterns, smoothed by decades in this city. The letter you sent was clear. I wasn't sure you'd received it. I received it the same day. He paused. I took some time to verify what you were telling me. And? And you were accurate. The instruments were fraudulent. The signatures are not yours. He said it without inflection, a statement of established fact, the way you'd say the temperature or the time. This affects positions my organization holds legitimately. I have an obligation to address that. I understand, Elena said. I want to be clear about something. He looked at her steadily. I'm not here as a favor. This is a legal and financial matter. My attorneys are here because we have standing. What you chose to do with the information you had, that's separate. I know, Elena said. There was a brief silence between them, not uncomfortable, more like a pause between two people who had agreed on the material facts and were checking, quietly, whether there was anything else that needed to be said. The forensic review will take several weeks, Damien said. Your attorney should be prepared for pressure from Cross's team during that window. They'll try to negotiate a resolution that limits exposure before the review is complete. Gerald knows what to expect. Damien glanced at Gerald, who was watching the exchange with his reading glasses halfway down his nose. Damien gave him a brief, respectful nod. Gerald returned it without expression. One more thing, Damien said, and now something shifted in his voice. Not much, but enough that Elena heard it. Calder South is going to default. The refinancing fell through last week. The debt service payment in October will not be met. Elena had known this was likely. Hearing it stated as certain was different from knowing it was likely. How bad, she said. The project goes into receivership. Investors take losses. The personal guarantee obligations, the ones under your name, would have made you the primary recovery target. He paused. That won't happen now. But Cross's exposure from the origination fraud will be significant. She absorbed this. How significant? Damien looked at her with the flat, unhurried patience of a man answering a question he had expected. The kind that ends things, he said. And what? Adrian found her in the third-floor corridor 20 minutes later. She was standing at the window at the end of the hall, looking out at the street below, holding a paper cup of coffee from the vending machine that she wasn't drinking. She heard his footsteps and recognized their rhythm before she saw him. That particular quick, controlled stride that meant he'd decided to do something he'd already talked himself into. Elena. She turned. He looked worse than he had an hour ago. Not dramatically worse. Adrian was too careful about surfaces for that. But around the eyes, there was a tightness, and his jaw was doing the thing it did when he was managing anger with incomplete success. Adrian, she said. He stopped 3 feet from her. He glanced down the corridor both ways, checking for witnesses with the reflex of a man who'd spent 20 years managing his public image. There was no one visible. Who approached him? He said. Did you go to him? Elena looked at him calmly. I don't know what you mean. Don't. The word came out harder than he'd intended, and she saw him pull it back internally. Elena, I'm not stupid. Viscari doesn't walk into a courthouse hearing for a portfolio investment. Somebody brought him here. His attorneys filed a motion, she said. They have standing. You should ask your team why they didn't see it coming. I'm asking you. She took a sip of the bad coffee and looked at him over the rim of the cup. She had imagined this conversation. She had not imagined it feeling quite like this. The strange, unaffected clarity of standing in front of someone who had shaped 12 years of her life and feeling, not hatred, not grief, but something more like the particular distance you feel when you realize you have finally stopped needing something to be different than it is. The guarantee documents, Adrian, she said. The ones with my name on them. Something moved across his face, fast and quickly controlled, but she'd been watching his face for 12 years. That was... Don't tell me what that was, she said. Her voice stayed level. I found them 4 years ago. The silence that followed this was different from the silences in the courtroom. It was the silence of a man recalibrating at a speed that was costing him something. You found them, he said. Flat. Testing the sentence. Behind your old textbooks, the storage room, Sophie's birthday weekend. He said nothing. I didn't touch them, Elena continued. I put them back. I waited. She looked at him without anger, which she understood was probably more unsettling than anger would have been. I needed to understand exactly what was there before I did anything with it. You waited 4 years. His voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before. Not quite disbelief, more like someone recalculating the landscape of the past and finding it completely different from the map they'd been using. I waited until the right moment, she said. There's a difference. He looked at her for a long, strange beat. Something was working behind his eyes that she couldn't entirely read, and that was new. She had always been able to read him. What do you want? He said finally. The question came out quieter than the others, almost careful. I want what was always mine, Elena said. Sophie's security. The assets that belonged to me before the marriage that you moved into company structures without my knowledge. And I want my name off every fraudulent obligation you put it on. She paused. That's all. I'm not interested in anything else. You could have come to me, he said. 4 years ago, you could have come to me directly. And said what? She said. That I knew what would have happened. He didn't answer. I know what would have happened, Elena said. So do you. Adrian Cross for a moment looked tired. Not the performative exhaustion of a man playing a role, but something underneath the performance. Something that looked almost like recognition. He looked at the woman in the inexpensive navy coat holding a bad cup of courthouse coffee, and he saw, perhaps for the first time in a very long while, exactly who she was. Then the moment closed. His jaw set. He straightened. The performance came back up over his face like a curtain. My team will be in touch with Fitch, he said. He turned and walked away down the corridor. Elena watched him go. She stood there for another minute after his footsteps had disappeared, looking at the street below and the ordinary movement of ordinary people on it. And then she finished the bad coffee and threw the cup away and went back to find Gerald. The calls started that afternoon. The first one came to Gerald's office at 2:30, an associate from Bristol's firm, asking about the timeline for the forensic document review and whether the respondent's team might be open to an expedited alternative resolution process. Gerald had told Elena about it over the phone in the dry, precise language he used for things he found professionally contemptible. Translation, he said. They want to negotiate before the review gets filed and becomes discoverable. What did you tell them? I told them I'd take it under advisement, which means I'm waiting to see what they offer. The second call came at 4, not to Gerald, but to Elena's cell. A number she didn't recognize, but when she answered, the voice was one she knew. Marcus Vell, who had been Adrian's chief financial officer for 8 years and was the single person in the Cross financial structure who understood its architecture well enough to have been a genuine witness. She had always been cordial to Marcus. He was good at his job and careful about his loyalties, and she had never made the mistake of assuming those loyalties included her. I just wanted you to know, Marcus said, without preamble or greeting, that I didn't know about the guarantees. Elena sat with this for a moment. Okay, she said. I mean it. I did the Calder South structures, I did the refinancing, but those guarantee instruments, I never touched them. I didn't know your name was on them. I believe you, Elena said, which was not entirely true, but was not entirely a lie either. I also wanted you to know, Marcus continued, and his voice was doing something careful that she paid attention to, that there are other instruments, not just Calder South. She kept her voice level. How many other instruments? I don't know exactly. I started finding things about 6 months ago. I thought at first it was a compliance error. He stopped. I've been talking to my own attorney. The cold moved through her slowly, the way it does when something you thought you had the full picture of turns out to have another room. Marcus, she said, you need to make sure your attorney is not connected to any firm that does work for Adrian or the Cross companies. A pause. Right, he said. The way he said it told her he hadn't fully thought about that yet. Call me back when you have someone independent, she said. She hung up and sat very still in the small kitchen of the Crestfield apartment, with Sophie's drawing on the wall and the radiator ticking in the corner, and let herself feel the full shape of what she was beginning to understand. It was bigger than she'd thought. She called Gerald. More instruments, she said when he picked up. How many more? I don't know yet. Marcus Vell is going to his own attorney. Gerald was quiet for a moment. She could hear him breathing. Elena, I know. If Cross has been doing this systematically, I know, Gerald. The exposure isn't just Calder South. We're talking about a pattern of conduct that... I know. She pressed her fingers against her temple. What do I do? He was quiet again for longer this time. She could hear him thinking through it, the careful, methodical way he'd worked through every problem she'd ever brought him. Not fast, but accurate. You do nothing tonight, he said. You let Marcus talk to an independent attorney. You do not reach out to Viscari's people. You do not respond to any contact from Bristol's firm. And tomorrow morning, you come to my kitchen and we look at what we actually have before we decide what it means. Okay, she said. Elena. His voice was different for a moment. Not the professional voice, but the older, more personal one. How are you holding up? She looked at Sophie's drawing. The two figures in front of the house with the yellow sun, the tall one with the curly hair. I'm holding up, she said. She meant it. That was the thing that surprised her. She genuinely meant it. She slept badly and woke at 4:50. She lay in the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling and made herself go through everything she knew, methodically, the way Gerald had taught her. Not reaching for meaning or narrative, just inventory. What she had, what she didn't have, what she could verify, what she couldn't. The guarantee instruments, documented, with forensic support, legally filed. The Calder South default, imminent and confirmed. The additional instruments Marcus had referenced, unknown quantity, unknown scope. Adrian's response so far, controlled surface, real fear underneath. Damien Viscari's position, legally protected, actively engaged, and, this was the part she turned over most carefully, something that she could not yet fully characterize. He had come when she'd contacted him. He had said it was about financial interest. Both things could be true at once, and she understood that, and she also understood that she should not build anything on the part that might be more than financial interest until she was very certain about what she was building. At 5:30, her phone lit up on the nightstand. A message from an unknown number, but the syntax was clipped and precise in a way she was beginning to recognize. Calder South creditor meeting scheduled tomorrow 9 a.m. 3 additional projects flagged. Call me. She sat up. 3 additional projects. She called the number. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying no trace of having been asleep, which either meant he hadn't been or he was the kind of person who came fully present the moment a call connected. She wasn't sure which. 3 projects, she said. Yes. No preamble, no pleasantries. She was finding that she appreciated this more than she would have expected. Our due diligence team flagged them this evening. Same pattern. Guarantee instruments under third-party names, a contractor, a former business partner, and you. All 3 projects have debt service problems. Why didn't your people catch this before? A pause. The first hesitation she'd heard from him. They should have, he said. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't even fully an explanation. It was simply an admission, clean and without decoration, and she filed it away. What happens at the creditor meeting, she said. The investors vote on whether to pursue recovery against the guarantee holders or negotiate with Cross directly. He paused. If they vote to pursue recovery, your name is first on the list. The cold came back. Slower this time, more deliberate, the cold of a thing understood rather than a thing surprised. When do I need to be there, she said. You don't, Damien said. I'll be there. Hartman will be there. But I need something from you before 9 tomorrow morning. What? I need whatever else you have, everything you've collected, all of it, not just what you sent in the letter. His voice was steady, but underneath the steadiness was something with urgency in it, controlled urgency, the kind you develop when you've learned that showing urgency openly costs you something. If there are more instruments out there, and we don't have the full picture before that meeting, I cannot protect the position. Elena held the phone and looked at the dark window and the orange glow of the streetlights outside. If we don't have the full picture before that meeting, I cannot protect the position, the word we sat in the sentence where it hadn't been before. She noticed it. She filed it. She set it aside for later. 7 o'clock, she said. Gerald Fitch's address. I'll have everything. A pause. I'll be there. He ended the call. Elena set the phone down and sat in the dark apartment and felt the weight of what was about to happen settle over her. Not with dread, but with the particular exhausting clarity of someone who had chosen a very long and difficult road and was now approaching the section of it that had always been the hardest, the section she had been preparing for in the dark for years without anyone watching. She got up. She put her feet on the cold floor. She felt that she was still here. Then she went to the kitchen table, opened her laptop, and began pulling together everything she had. Gerald Fitch's kitchen smelled like coffee and old paper, which was the smell Elena associated with every serious conversation she'd had in the past 11 months. She arrived at 6:47. Gerald was already at the table, his reading glasses on, a yellow legal pad open in front of him with handwritten notes in the small, compressed script he used when he was thinking fast. He'd made a full pot of coffee. He'd also, she noticed, pushed the kitchen table against the wall and pulled in extra chairs from the living room. He had been expecting more people. Dana Osei arrived at 6:52 with a rolling cart of document boxes and the focused, slightly wired energy of someone who had not slept and had made peace with that. She sat up at the counter without speaking and began laying folders in sequence without being asked. At 7:03, a black car stopped in front of the building. Damien Vescari came in alone. He'd left the security men outside. He was wearing a different suit than the day before, dark charcoal, no tie, and he looked, Elena thought, exactly as composed as he had in the courtroom, which told her either that this was simply how he was, or that the creditor meeting scheduled for 9 o'clock was a contained enough threat that it didn't require a different register. He looked at the table. He looked at the boxes. He looked at Elena. "Show me what you have," he said. For the next 90 minutes, the four of them worked through Elena's archive in a focused, almost wordless collaboration that had the quality of surgery, precise, purposeful, no motion wasted. Dana walked Damien's attention through the original Calder South guarantee instruments first. The 3 documents bearing Elena's forged signature, the forensic comparison sheets showing the signature discrepancies, the certified exemplar signatures pulled from Elena's actual legal records. Damien read everything without comment. He turned pages with a slowness that told Elena he was genuinely reading, not scanning. Gerald handled the corporate timeline, the structure of the cross-development entities, the sequence of Calder South's financing rounds, the points at which Elena's name had been inserted into obligation chains she had never agreed to. Elena sat across from Damien and answered questions when asked. There were not many questions. Damien's method, she was learning, was to absorb information almost entirely before he formed questions. And when the questions came, they were specific and exact and went straight to the load-bearing points in whatever structure he was examining. At 8:09, he set down the folder he was reading and looked at Gerald. "The 3 additional projects," he said. Marcus Vell flagged them. "Has he provided documentation?" "He reached out this morning," Gerald said. "He's retained an independent attorney, someone out of Fairfield, no cross connections. They're prepared to cooperate." "How clean is Vell?" Gerald looked at Elena. Elena thought about Marcus's voice on the phone the night before. The careful way he'd said "I didn't know," the way he'd said "I've been talking to my own attorney," with the slightly shaken quality of a man who has recently discovered that the building he works in has a structural problem he didn't design but might be standing in when it falls. "I think he's clean," she said. "I think he found something and it scared him, and he called me because I was the safest person he could think of to call." "Which means he trusts you," Damien said. "Which means he's afraid," she said. Damien considered this. Same thing sometimes. He stood and refilled his coffee from the pot on the counter without asking permission, which struck Elena as the most natural thing he'd done since arriving. He stood at the counter and looked at the window. "The creditor meeting will have 7 principals. 2 of them are mine. 2 are independent investment vehicles. The remaining 3 are funds that have cross-adjacent relationships, board overlaps, prior co-investments. Those 3 will vote to pursue recovery against the guarantee holders if it protects Cross's negotiating position." "Can they do that?" Elena said. "If the instruments are fraudulent." "The fraud hasn't been legally established yet," Damien said. "The forensic review is in process. Until there's a finding, the instruments are technically valid, and the obligations technically enforceable." He looked at her directly. "They can absolutely vote to pursue recovery. The fact that the instruments may later be found fraudulent doesn't prevent them from initiating collection action now." Elena sat with this. She understood it legally. She also understood what it meant practically, that the protection she had spent 11 months building could be outrun by the speed of a creditor vote she had not, until Marcus's call the night before, known was coming. "What do you need to stop it?" she said. Damien looked at her for a moment with the same quality of attention he'd given the documents. "I need the 3 additional projects documented before the meeting. If I can show the room that the pattern is systemic, that this isn't an isolated irregularity in Calder South, but a repeated practice, it changes the calculus for the independent funds. It becomes a fraud case, not a collection case, and fraud cases don't get resolved by pursuing guarantee holders." "We have partial documentation on 2 of the 3, Dana said from the counter, without turning around. "The 3rd project, the West Line mixed use, we've had difficulty accessing the underlying instruments. They appear to be held in a structure that's a level deeper than what we've been working with." Damien set down his coffee cup. "The West Line structure," he said, and something in the way he said it changed the texture of the room. Elena looked at him. "You know it." "I know it," he said. He didn't elaborate immediately. He was doing the same thing he did with everything, absorbing before speaking, checking the weight of what he was about to say. "Damien." The first time she'd used his name directly. He registered it. The briefest adjustment in his posture, almost nothing. "What is the West Line structure?" He looked at her. "It's mine," he said. "The West Line project is a Viscari Group holding." The kitchen went very quiet. Elena heard the refrigerator humming. She heard a car passing on the street outside. She heard Gerald set his pen down on the legal pad with a small, careful sound. "Explain that," she said. "West Line is a commercial redevelopment project on the east side of the warehouse district," Damien said. His voice was flat and even, which she was learning meant he was being precise, not defensive. "The Viscari Group acquired a 40% equity stake 2 years ago through a legitimate investment vehicle. It is a legal, documented investment." "And Adrian Cross is a partner," Elena said. "Cross Development holds 30%. And my name is on the guarantee instruments for that project." Damien looked at her steadily. "That's what I'm telling you." Elena stood up from the table. Not because she was angry, she wasn't certain yet what she was, but because she needed to be standing. She crossed to the window and looked out at Gerald's narrow backyard and the brick wall behind it, and the gray October morning sitting on top of everything. "You knew," she said, "before the courthouse. You knew your project was one of them." "I knew Westline had guarantee instruments under a third-party name," Damien said. "I did not know until my team ran the trace 3 nights ago that the name was yours. And I did not know until this morning that the signature on those instruments is not yours." She turned to look at him. She was measuring him the way she measured everything now, not with anger, not with trust, but with the careful assessment of a woman who had spent 11 months learning that the full picture always had another room. "Your team missed it," she said. "Yes." "For how long?" "The instruments were introduced into the West Line structure 14 months ago. My team conducted a compliance review 8 months ago and did not flag them." He paused. Someone with knowledge of our review process would have known the window. Elena understood what he was telling her. Adrian, or someone working for Adrian, had inserted the fraudulent instruments into the West Line structure in a way that was timed to survive Viscari Group's own internal review. Adrian had forged her name into the financial structure of a Mafia Don's real estate investment. She sat back down. She pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at them. "How bad is the exposure on West Line?" "The project's primary debt service is $42 million, Damien said. "The guarantee instruments under your name represent personal liability for $9 million of that." Gerald made a sound that was not quite a word. "The West Line project," Damien continued, "is not in default. It is, however, connected to the same creditor network as Calder South. If Calder South triggers a cross-default clause, which it will when it fails to meet the October payment, it affects West Line's covenant structure." Elena looked at him. "So they both collapse?" "Not immediately, but the creditor meeting this morning will be voting with knowledge of both projects' risk profiles. And if the 3 cross-adjacent funds choose to pursue recovery on the guarantee instruments..." He stopped. $9 million, Elena said. plus the Calder South exposure, potentially more depending on what the other two projects show. Dana said very quietly from the counter, "Elena?" Elena looked at her. Dana had turned around. She was holding a folder, and her face had the careful, controlled expression of someone who had found something while they were talking and had been waiting for a pause to say it. "The other two projects. I got into the Harmon Street structure while you were all talking." She held the folder out. "There's a fifth name." Elena took the folder. She opened it. She read the name on the guarantee instrument header. The name was Sophie Ann Vaughn. Mboptown. The sound that came out of Elena was not a word. It was brief and involuntary, and she cut it off immediately, the way you cut off something that is going to cost you if it continues. She set the folder on the table. She kept her hands on it, pressing it flat, and she breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth. And she did not look at anyone in the room. Sophie was 7 years old. Sophie had a dog named Brutus at her aunt's house in Dunmore, who snored and ate her good striped sock. Sophie had drawn a house with a yellow sun and two figures in front of it and taped it to the wall of a 460-square-foot apartment because her mother was the tall one with the curly hair. Sophie Ann Vaughn, age 7, had her name on a financial guarantee instrument for a failed commercial real estate project. "When was this originated?" Gerald's voice, precise and controlled in the way it got when he was holding something down deliberately. 16 months ago, Dana said. Sophie would have been 5. "It's void," Gerald said. "A minor cannot execute a financial instrument. It's legally void on its face." "It's fraudulent on its face," Damien said. His voice had changed. It was the same volume, the same measured pace, but something underneath it had shifted, a pressure change, subtle and unmistakable. Which means Cross didn't just use Elena's name. He used their daughter's name. The room was absolutely still. Elena looked up from the table. She looked at Damien. His face was composed, but in the stillness of it, she could see the thing she'd heard in his voice, a cold, specific quality of anger that had nothing to do with money. "He needed names," Elena said. Her voice was very steady. She was the most dangerous kind of calm now, the kind that sits on top of something enormous. He needed warm bodies to attach the liability to. He ran out of names. "He used his daughter," Gerald said. "He said it the way you say something you need to hear out loud in order to fully believe it." "He used his daughter," Elena confirmed. She stood up again. She walked to the counter and stood next to Dana and looked at the folder in her own hand as if checking that the page said what she'd read. It did. She put it back down. She turned to face the room. "What time is the creditor meeting?" she said. 9 o'clock, Damien said. She looked at the clock on Gerald's kitchen wall. It was 8:22. "Then we have 38 minutes, she said. "What do we need?" They moved fast. Dana got on her laptop and began pulling the Harmon Street documentation into a shareable file format. Gerald called his contact at the county court clerk's office, a woman named Portia who'd worked there for 30 years and owed Gerald a favor from a case in 2009 that had never fully been settled between them, and explained what he needed in terms specific enough that Portia understood immediately and promised 20 minutes. Damien made a single call, in Italian, brief, and when he finished, he looked at Hartman's number on his phone and composed a text with the precise, unhurried manner of a man who did not send texts he hadn't fully considered. He sent it and put the phone in his pocket. Elena did none of these things. She stood at Gerald's kitchen window and looked at the backyard and thought about Sophie. She thought about the conversation they'd had 2 weeks ago when she'd driven up to Dunmore for a Sunday visit, and Sophie had shown her a painting she'd made at her aunt's kitchen table. Orange and purple streaks that Sophie had informed her, with complete seriousness, was a tiger in a thunderstorm. Elena had said it was the best tiger in a thunderstorm she had ever seen. Sophie had looked at her with the particular expression 7-year-olds produce when they are deciding whether an adult is telling the truth or being polite, and apparently decided Elena was sincere because she had immediately offered to make another one. Elena thought about Sophie's face making that assessment. She thought about the fact that her daughter's name was on a legal document in a corrupt real estate deal, put there by the child's own father, used as a financial instrument the way you'd use a piece of property you owned. She felt the thing that had been underneath the calm, the enormous thing, And she looked at it clearly and without flinching, and then she put it somewhere she could find it later and turned back to the kitchen. "Gerald," she said. "The Harmon Street instrument. Sophie's name. Can we get a certified void determination before 9? Gerald looked at Portia's number on his phone. "I'll try." "Try harder than that." He looked at her over his glasses. Something in her face made him nod immediately and dial. Damien was watching her from across the room. She met his eyes. "The 3 cross-adjacent funds," she said. "The ones that will vote for recovery. What do they need to vote the other way?" "Documentation of the pattern," he said, "and standing. If there's a party in the room with sufficient stake and sufficient legal documentation to formally allege fraud, it changes the vote from a financial recovery question to a legal liability question. Nobody wants to be associated with fraud recovery." "You have that standing," Elena said. "Yes. But you need more than Calder South to make the pattern argument. I need all 5 projects represented in the documentation. Including Westline." "Including Westline," she looked at him. "You're going to have to disclose to the room that your own project was compromised." A pause, the longest one she'd seen from him. "Yes." "That exposes your due diligence failure." "Yes." She held his gaze. "Why would you do that?" He looked at her with the dark, steady eyes and said, "Because it's the right thing to do." Then, after a beat, "And because the alternative is worse." She didn't know which of those answers she believed more. She wasn't sure it mattered. "Okay," she said. "Then we need everything to Hartman in 25 minutes. Dana, what's the status on the file transfer?" 12 minutes for the full package. Make it 8. Dana's fingers were already moving. At 8:44, Elena's phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number. She almost didn't answer it. Then she thought about Marcus Vell and his independent attorney in Fairfield, and she answered. It was not Marcus. It was a woman's voice, cool, unhurried, with the kind of precision that comes from choosing every word deliberately. "Ms. Vaughn, my name is Claire Desmond. I'm the managing director of Hargrove Capital, one of the independent funds in the Calder South creditor structure." Elena felt the back of her neck tighten. "Ms. Desmond." "I want to be straightforward with you," Desmond said. "I've received communications this morning from 2 different directions, from Viscari Group's counsel and from Cross Development's counsel." A pause. "I thought you should know what Cross's team told us." "Tell me," Elena said. "They told us that the guarantee instruments under your name were, in fact, signed by you, that the forensic challenge is a delay tactic, and that you are currently conspiring with Damien Viscari to manipulate the creditor vote by introducing fraudulent fraud allegations." Another pause. "They also provided us with documentation they claim supports this." Elena closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. "What kind of documentation?" "A communication record," Desmond said. "Email correspondence between you and a Viscari Group financial officer dating back 8 months, discussing strategy around the Calder South default." The cold that moved through Elena now was different from the others. It was the cold of a trap she had not seen. "I've never communicated with anyone from Viscari Group," Elena said. "The emails use your address." "Then they're fabricated." "I don't know that," Desmond said. "That's why I'm calling you rather than simply voting with Cross's recommendation." A pause. Shorter this time. "I've been in this business for 22 years, Ms. Vaughn. I know what manufactured documentation looks like. I also know what legitimate documentation looks like. These sit right at the border, and I'm not comfortable making a call either way in the next 15 minutes. "Then don't," Elena said. "Ask for a delay." "I've already told you what I know," Desmond said. "What you do with it is your problem." And she ended the call. Elena lowered the phone. She turned to the room. 3 faces looked at her. Gerald, Dana, Damien. "Adrian has fabricated an email record," she said. "Correspondence between me and Viscari Group going back 8 months. He's presenting it to the creditor meeting as evidence that we're manufacturing the fraud allegation." The silence in Gerald Fitch's kitchen lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then Damien said, 8 months ago?" "That's what she said." 8 months ago, Damien repeated, and his voice was doing the quiet, pressurized thing again. I had not received your letter. I had no knowledge you existed in the context of Calder South. I know that, Elena said, which means the emails are fabricated whole cloth. I know that too. Can you prove it? And that was the question. That was the one question that the 11 months of careful, methodical, patient work had not fully prepared for. Because Elena had anticipated Adrian fighting back, had anticipated legal obstruction and negotiating pressure and attempts to discredit the forensic review, but she had not anticipated that he would manufacture evidence of collusion between her and Damien Vescari, going back to a time before they had any relationship at all. She had not anticipated it because it was the kind of move that required a level of premeditation that she had, despite everything she knew about her husband, underestimated. She stood in Gerald Fitch's kitchen at 8:49 on an October morning and felt the floor of the thing she'd built shift beneath her. The server records, Dana said. She was already typing. Email headers can be verified against server logs. If the emails are fabricated, the metadata won't match. I need access to... She stopped typing. She looked up. Her face had gone carefully neutral in the way faces go when someone has found something they didn't expect. Elena. What? Your email account. Dana turned the laptop around. Someone has been in it. Elena crossed the room and looked at the screen. The account activity log, login events, timestamps, IP addresses. She scanned it quickly, the way Gerald had taught her to read documents, not for the expected, but for the anomaly. The anomaly was there. 7 months and 3 weeks ago, a login from an IP address that was not hers at 2:17 in the morning, lasting 44 minutes. 44 minutes. Long enough to read. Long enough to understand her communication patterns and her language. Long enough to learn how she wrote, how she phrased things, what her rhythms were. Long enough to build a convincing forgery. He's been in my account, Elena said. The words came out flat and factual, which was the only register she had available to her at that moment. He was in my account before I filed for divorce, before I contacted Gerald, before any of this started. She looked at Damien. Damien looked back at her with an expression she had not seen from him before. Not alarm, not uncertainty, but something grimmer and more specific. The look of a man recalculating not the situation, but the opponent. He's been building this, Elena said, not as a response. He's been building it in advance. He knew I would eventually find the documents. He knew I would... She stopped. He was ready for me. The thing that she had put away earlier, the enormous thing, the one underneath the calm, began to push against its containment. Adrian had not simply forged her name and hoped she wouldn't find it. He had found it, waited for her to find it, and spent the months since her discovery building a counter-narrative so complete that when she finally moved, he would be able to turn her own evidence against her. He had put her daughter's name on a legal document. He had accessed her private communications. He had manufactured 8 months of false correspondence. He had been, the entire time that she thought she was preparing in secret, watching her prepare and building the mechanism to dismantle her. Gerald, she said. Yes. His voice was quiet. How exposed are we right now, truly? Gerald looked at his legal pad. He looked at the folders on the table. He looked at Elena with the honest, unadorned assessment of a man who had been in law for 50 years and had no interest in telling her anything other than the truth. If they present those emails to the creditor meeting as authentic, he said, and we can't immediately rebut them with server verification, the independent funds will vote with Cross's recommendation. The stay on the settlement may be challenged, and the fraud allegation, our fraud allegation, becomes a competing claim in a muddied evidentiary field. He paused. That's a bad position. How bad? Bad enough that Adrian Cross walks away from all of it, Gerald said, and you become the one explaining yourself. Elena looked at the clock on the wall. 8:53. 7 minutes until the creditor meeting. She looked at Damien. He was already looking at her. In his face was no panic, no hesitation, no performance of any kind. Just the flat, patient, load-bearing steadiness of a man who had decided something and was waiting to see if she had decided the same thing. I need to be in that meeting, she said. You're not a party to the creditor structure, Damien said. Then make me one, she said. A pause. His eyes on hers, the weight of the thing between them, whatever it was, financial interest in something older and less nameable. There's a way to do it, he said slowly. If you assign a partial interest in your guarantee position to a named party in the Vescari structure, even nominal, it creates technical standing. Then do it, Elena said. Right now. Damien looked at Hartman's number on his phone. He looked at Elena. He made the call. The car moved fast through morning traffic. Elena sat in the back of Damien's car with her document bag on her lap, and Gerald beside her and Dana in the front passenger seat with her laptop open and both hands working. The driver, a compact, quiet man named Reeves, whom Damien had introduced with no further context, navigated the grid of downtown streets with the precise, unhurried efficiency of someone who had driven people to urgent places many times and understood that speed was less useful than accuracy. Damien sat to Elena's left. He was on the phone. He'd been on the phone since they left Gerald's building, switching between two calls with the controlled fluency of someone managing simultaneous fires, and Elena had stopped trying to follow the specifics because she needed to use the 12 minutes of transit time for something more useful than listening. She opened her own laptop and pulled up the email account activity log Dana had screenshotted before they left. The login. 2:17 in the morning, 7 months and 3 weeks ago. 44 minutes. She thought about what you could learn about a person in 44 minutes of reading their private correspondence, their habits, their phrases, the particular way they started sentences, ended them, where they put the weight. She wrote long emails when she was processing something difficult. She wrote short ones when she was certain. She used full sentences even in informal messages because that was how she'd been raised and she'd never been able to stop. She never used exclamation points. She almost never used the word great or wonderful or any of the reflexive positive affirmations that populated professional correspondence the way weeds populated gardens. If Adrian, or whoever he'd tasked with this, had been in her account for 44 minutes and was competent, the fabricated emails would capture all of that. They would sound like her. They would feel like her. And to a creditor fund that had never met her and had no baseline for comparison, they would be indistinguishable from her. Dana, she said. Still pulling the metadata, Dana said without looking up. The server log request went to your email provider at 8:57. Verification response takes between 15 and 40 minutes depending on their queue. We don't have 40 minutes. I know that. Elena looked out the window. The city moved past in the flat gray October light. The glass fronts of office buildings catching the sky, pedestrians crossing against lights, a delivery truck with its hazards on blocking half a lane, and two cabs navigating around it with the resigned patience of people who had accepted that this city would always put something in the way. Damien ended his second call. Hartman has the standing documentation, he said. The nominal assignment is executed. You're technically a party of interest in the Vescari position on Harmon Street. Will it hold up? Gerald said. Long enough for today. Damien looked at Elena. Once you're in the room, you have the right to speak. But, Elena. He paused. The first time he'd used her name without the formal prefix. She registered it and moved past it. They will come at you directly. Briscoe will be there, possibly Cross himself. I know. The email fabrication is their primary weapon. If they can establish doubt about your credibility in the first 10 minutes, the room tips. Then I need to establish something before they can use it. She looked at him. Is there anyone in that meeting who knew Adrian before the Calder South deal? Personally, before the money was involved? Damien thought for exactly 2 seconds. Fielding. Robert Fielding. He manages one of the Cross-adjacent funds. He and Cross were at the same business school 20-some years ago. Are they close? They were. I don't know what they are now. People who were close to Adrian before he had money, Elena said carefully, know something the money people don't. Damien looked at her with the dark, steady attention. What do they know? That he's always been afraid of being found out, she said. That everything he's built has been about covering the distance between who he actually is and who he wants people to think he is. She paused. People who knew him early sometimes see the thing underneath, even if they've never named it. Damien held her gaze for a moment. Fielding votes with Cross as a habit, he said, not conviction. Habits can break, Elena said. The car stopped. Votes. The Calder South creditor meeting was being held in the offices of a firm called Meridian Advisors on the 29th floor of a building called the Harwick Tower, a name Elena had heard Adrian use in passing at least a dozen times over the years, always in the context of deals and meetings and the machinery of money moving between people who had too much of it. She had never been inside. The lobby was marble and glass, and the particular kind of silence that expensive buildings cultivate deliberately. Reeves stayed with the car. Damien's 2 security men materialized from somewhere and flanked the group without being asked. Elena walked across the lobby with her document bag and her navy coat, and Gerald on her left, and Dana, who had elected to come in and work from the hallway, on her right, and she felt with extraordinary clarity that she had spent 11 months preparing for a version of this morning that had just been replaced by a harder version, and that the only thing to do with that information was walk faster. The elevator opened on 29 to a reception area where a woman in a gray blazer was already standing, clearly having been alerted to their arrival, with an expression of professional composure stretched thin over genuine tension. Hartman was waiting 10 feet from the elevator doors. He looked at Damien first, then at Elena, then at the document bag, and he said, "They're already in the room. Cross is there in person. Driscoll and 2 associates. They've had 15 minutes with the independent funds before we arrived." 15 minutes, Gerald said. They requested an early start. Hartman's jaw was tight. The chair of the meeting, Vasquez from the primary creditor bank, approved it without notifying us. Elena felt Damien go still beside her. Not visibly still. He didn't change his posture or his expression, but she was standing close enough to feel the shift in him, the moment of controlled fury that moved through him like current through a wire and disappeared. "Vasquez is the chair," Damien said to Hartman. Flat. "Yes." "And he started the meeting early. 15 minutes ago." Elena looked at Damien. "Did Vasquez's bank have prior dealings with Cross outside this structure?" The look that passed across Damien's face was brief and sufficient. "We'll discuss that later," he said, and started moving toward the conference room. What? The room held 12 people. Elena counted them in the first 3 seconds after the door opened. The instinct of a woman who had spent years in Adrian's professional world learning to assess a room before the room assessed her. 12 chairs around a long table of pale wood, 7 principals, which matched what Damien had told her. The others were attorneys and support staff. At the far end of the room, a man she assumed was Vasquez sat at the head of the table with the slightly harried authority of someone who had agreed to run a meeting that was turning out to be more complicated than described. Adrian was on the right side of the table, 2 seats from the head. He was wearing the navy suit again. He looked up when the door opened, and the thing that moved across his face when he saw Elena was not surprise. It was something more specific than surprise, a recalculation happening behind a surface that was trying very hard not to show it. Driscoll was beside him. She looked at Elena with an expression that contained something Elena had not seen there before: caution. "Ms. Vaughn." Vasquez found her face with the slightly confused attention of someone who has been briefed on the expected attendees and is finding the actual attendees don't match. "I was informed my client holds a party of interest position in the Viscari Group's Harmon Street holding," Hartman said, stepping in from Elena's left with the smooth, practiced efficiency of a man who had been retained for exactly this kind of entry. "The documentation was filed this morning. She has standing." Vasquez looked at Adrian. Adrian's jaw set. He looked at Driscoll. Driscoll leaned close and said something in 3 words that Elena couldn't hear from across the room, but could read the shape of "not enough time." "We'll need to verify," Vasquez began. "The documentation is in order," Damien said. He said it from the doorway without raising his voice, and the room treated it the way rooms treated things Damien Viscari said, as statements of established fact that didn't require further negotiation. He came in and took the seat across from Adrian, which left Elena the chair between Damien and Hartman, and she sat down and set her document bag on the table and put her hands flat on the surface and looked at the room. A man on the far left, early 60s, a heaviness in his face that suggested he had been tired for a long time, was watching her with the particular attention of someone trying to place her. That would be Fielding, she guessed, the business school friend. She met his eyes briefly and then looked away. "Before we continue," Briscoe said, standing, she'd clearly decided that the initiative was more important than the protocol. "I want to address the standing issue directly. The documents purporting to establish Ms. Vaughn's party of interest position were executed this morning, minutes before this meeting. We have serious questions about whether that constitutes genuine standing or a manufactured procedural maneuver to introduce a disruptive party into a creditor proceeding." "The documents are valid," Hartman said. "Their validity is exactly what's in question," Briscoe said. She was good. She kept her voice measured, professional, pitched to the room rather than to Hartman. As is, frankly, Ms. Vaughn's role in the broader situation. "Mr. Vasquez, I want to present something to the room before we proceed." Vasquez looked at the papers in front of him with the expression of a man who had not expected to be chairing a battle and was reconsidering his professional choices. "Miss Briscoe." "I'll be brief," she said. She opened a folder. She slid copies down the table, 7 copies, one for each principal, executed with the smooth confidence of preparation. "What you have in front of you is a selection of email correspondence between Ms. Vaughn and a financial officer of the Viscari Group, dating over a period of approximately 8 months. These communications detail a coordinated strategy between Ms. Vaughn and the Viscari organization to manufacture fraudulent allegations against cross-development, specifically timed to disrupt the Calder South debt resolution and influence the divorce settlement proceeding." The room was quiet in the particular way that rooms get quiet when they are deciding whether to believe something. Elena looked at the papers in front of her. She recognized the format. It was her email client, her interface, her address in the header. The body text was formatted in her style. Full sentences, no exclamation points. The language was careful and measured in the way her language was careful and measured, and it was completely, entirely false. She did not pick up the papers. She kept her hands flat on the table and breathed slowly and looked at Briscoe. "You've had those prepared for a while," Elena said. Briscoe looked at her. "The documents speak for themselves." "They speak in my voice," Elena said, "which required someone to spend time in my email account learning how I write." She turned to the room. "My email account was accessed without my authorization 7 months and 3 weeks ago at 2:17 in the morning from an IP address that is not mine. I have the server log. My technical consultant is currently in possession of the full metadata that will prove those emails were never sent from my account, never received by any Viscari server, and were fabricated using knowledge of my writing patterns obtained through illegal access to my private communications." The room held the statement. Elena felt her pulse in her throat. She kept her face still. "That's a significant allegation," Vasquez said carefully. "I'm aware of that," Elena said. "Can you produce this server log?" "We're waiting on verification from the email provider. The request was submitted at 8:57 this morning." She looked at Vasquez directly. "I'm asking this room for the time it takes to receive that verification before any vote is held." Briscoe said, "Mr. Vasquez, this is precisely the kind of procedural obstruction we anticipated. It's a request for 20 minutes, Elena said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "If the emails are genuine, the server verification will confirm it and I have no case. If they're fabricated, you'll know in 20 minutes and you'll understand exactly what kind of operation you're being asked to participate in." Silence. Then Robert Fielding, from the far left of the table, said, "I'd like to hear the server verification." Briscoe turned to look at him. Adrian turned to look at him. Elena allowed herself exactly 1 second of looking at Fielding, the tired face, the particular set of a man who has been doing things the easy way for a long time and has just felt something shift in the ground beneath that choice. "Robert," Adrian said, low, almost quiet, the tone of a man invoking a long history. Fielding looked at Adrian. "Adrian, I've known you for 23 years. He said it without heat, almost gently. "I voted with your interests in 6 different proceedings because I believed they were also the right interests. But I'm not voting on anything in the next 5 minutes. He looked at Vasquez. I want the verification. Vasquez, with the visible relief of a man who has been given permission to do the sensible thing, looked at Elena. 20 minutes. Elena stepped into the hallway. Dana was already at the small table near the elevator bank, laptop open, phone pressed between her ear and shoulder. She looked up when Elena came through the door and held up 4 fingers, which Elena interpreted as 4 minutes. She stood in the hallway and felt the adrenaline working through her system with the uncomfortable specificity of a body that has been in a high-stakes environment for too long. Her hands, when she looked at them, were steady. That was something. The rest of her felt like a building in a high wind, the structure sound, but the surfaces vibrating. Damien came through the conference room door 30 seconds later. He stood near her without speaking. He looked at Dana. 4 minutes, Elena told him. He nodded. He looked at the elevator bank. He said, Fielding. I know. You read him right. He looked tired, she said. People who are tired of something will take the first reasonable excuse to stop doing it. Damien looked at her profile for a moment. You do that a lot. Read rooms. I had a lot of practice in Adrian's world. A pause. You sit in enough rooms where you're the least powerful person at the table, you learn to find the thing that no one else is looking at. What are you not looking at right now? He said. She glanced at him. It was a sharp question, deliberately precise, and she understood it was not idle conversation. He was reading her the way she read rooms. Marcus Vell, she said. He said there were more instruments. We have 5 projects. I don't know if there are more. There aren't, Damien said. My team finished the trace this morning. 5 projects. We have them all. She breathed out slowly. Okay. And the Harmon Street instrument, Sophie's name. That one is void. Gerald's contact at the court clerk confirmed it at 8:41. Minor cannot execute. It's legally void on its face, and the origination constitutes fraud against a minor, which carries separate criminal exposure. Elena had known this was coming. Gerald had told her in the car. But hearing it stated fully in the hallway of the Harwick Tower with her pulse still elevated from the room she'd just been in, produced a reaction she hadn't expected. Her eyes filled. Not with grief. With something more like the physical release of a pressure she'd been holding for so long she'd stopped feeling it as pressure and started feeling it as weather. She blinked it back. 3 seconds. Gone. Criminal exposure, she said. Her voice was level. The district attorney's office has a financial crimes unit that has been looking at cross-development for 18 months, Damien said. Unrelated origin. They'll be interested in what we've found. She looked at him. You've already talked to them. My attorneys have had a preliminary conversation. He held her gaze. I should have told you that this morning. Yes, she said. You should have. A pause between them. Not hostile. The honest kind. The kind where 2 people who are operating in close quarters acknowledge the edges of what they know about each other and decide what to do with the gaps. I'll tell you when I do things that affect your situation, he said. That was an error. She looked at him for a moment. Okay, she said. Dana said, I have it. The server verification came back clean. The metadata was definitive. The emails in Briscoe's folder had headers that matched Elena's email client, but showed origination timestamps inconsistent with her server's authentication logs. 3 of the emails had been originated from a device that had never connected to Elena's email account. 2 showed signs of header manipulation, a technical marker, Dana explained quickly in the hallway, that was the digital equivalent of a document with someone else's ink on a page that was supposed to be typed. Dana printed the verification report on a portable printer she had apparently been carrying in her bag, because Dana Osei had understood before anyone else that the day was going to require a portable printer. Elena took the 8-page report and went back into the conference room. She put it on the table in front of Vasquez. She put copies in front of the 7 principals. She stood at the end of the table and waited for the room to read. The silence that followed was the densest silence she'd been in all day. Briscoe looked at the report. She looked at it for a long time. Elena watched her read it and watched the specific, terrible moment when a very good attorney understands that the document she has just presented to a room full of people is about to be comprehensively destroyed. Briscoe looked at Adrian. Adrian looked at the report. His face was absolutely still, the way a face gets when the person wearing it is running through options at speed and not finding any that work. "Mr. Vasquez," Elena said, "what you have in front of you is forensic verification that the emails presented by Cross's counsel were fabricated, originated from a device that accessed my private email account illegally, using knowledge of my writing patterns to construct a false record of communication with the Vescari group." She paused. "This fabrication was prepared in advance of this meeting, which means that when Cross Development filed the original guarantee instruments, they also planned for the possibility that those instruments would eventually be challenged, and they prepared a counter-narrative. That's not a compliance error, that's a system." She opened her document bag. "What I'm providing to each of you now," she said, "is documentation of 5 separate real estate projects in which financial guarantee instruments were executed under names that did not consent to them. My name appears on 4 of these projects. A 7-year-old child's name appears on the 5th. The room heard that last sentence differently than it heard the others. Even Vasquez looked up from his papers. "The minor's instrument is legally void and constitutes origination fraud," Elena continued. "The other 4 are supported by forensic signature analysis showing they do not match verified exemplars of my signature. All 5 projects are connected to Cross Development. All 5 were structured to externalize financial risk onto individuals who had no knowledge of and gave no consent to the obligations being placed on them." She looked at the room. "This is not a divorce dispute. This is a pattern of financial fraud spanning at minimum 3 years and 5 projects, and this room is currently being asked to initiate recovery action against the primary victim of that fraud." She stopped. She sat down. The room was still. Then Robert Fielding said, to no one in particular, "God Almighty." And Briscoe said quietly to Adrian, "Don't say anything." And Adrian, for the first time in 20 years of boardrooms and deal tables and rooms where he had always known what to say, said nothing. What happened next happened fast and not fast at the same time, the way things happen when a structure gives way. The actual collapse is sudden, but the room takes a while to understand it's in a different building than it was a moment ago. Vasquez called a formal recess. The 2 cross-adjacent funds whose managers had not been in the room when Briscoe presented her fabricated emails immediately sent their representatives into a private cluster near the window. Fielding stood up and walked to the far side of the room and took out his phone and had a short call that Elena, watching him from her chair, understood was to his own legal counsel. The 3rd cross-adjacent fund's representative, a young woman named Park, who had said nothing for the entire meeting, looked at the verification report and then looked at Adrian and then quietly closed her folder. Briscoe leaned close to Adrian and spoke in a rapid, controlled undertone. Elena, who was 15 feet away, could not hear the words, but she could see the quality of the exchange, the way Briscoe's hands moved in the contained, emphatic gestures of someone delivering information that will not be well received, and the way Adrian's face held its stillness with increasing effort, the composure beginning to cost him something visible. Damien, beside Elena, said very quietly, "Vasquez will not let the recovery vote proceed. Not with this on the table." "Agreed," Hartman said from Elena's other side. "Cross is going to try to negotiate a private resolution before this gets to the DA's office," Damien continued. "He'll come to you." Elena looked at the room, at Adrian, who was sitting with his hands flat on the table and his jaw set and his eyes doing the thing they did when he was running out of options. At Briscoe, who was too good at her job not to know that what had just happened in this room had changed the shape of everything. At Fielding, still on his phone by the window, looking older than he had 20 minutes ago. "When he comes," she said, "what do I say?" Damien looked at her. "What do you want?" She thought about it. Not about strategy, about the actual answer. "I want my name off every document," she said. "I want Sophie's name off every document. I want the assets that were mine disclosed and returned. And I want it done before this goes to the DA so that I control the timing and the terms." "That's achievable," Damien said. "I'm not finished," she said. "I want Marcus Vell protected. He cooperated. He found things he could have buried. He should not be collateral damage. Damien looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression, not surprise, but something adjacent to it. The particular attention of a man who has reassessed something he thought he already understood. I'll have Hartman include it. And I want to be the one to tell Sophie, she said. Not a lawyer, not a document. Me. Whatever comes next, I talked to my daughter about it myself. He held her gaze. Of course, he said. The recess stretched to 20 minutes, then 30. At 11:47, the conference room door opened and Briscoe came out into the hallway. She looked at Elena with an expression that had gone through several transformations since the morning and had arrived finally at something that was not quite respect, but was not nothing. Mr. Cross would like to speak with you, she said. Privately, 5 minutes. Elena looked at Gerald. Gerald looked at the ceiling briefly, which was his way of consulting whatever internal reference he kept up there, and then looked back at her and gave a very small nod. 5 minutes, Elena said, in the hallway, and Gerald stays. Briscoe went back into the room. Adrian came out 2 minutes later. He looked, and this was the thing she had not expected, though perhaps she should have, diminished, not broken. Adrian Cross would not be broken by a bad morning, not even by a morning like this one. He was too built for endurance. But the space between who he'd been when he walked into Meridian Advisors 2 hours ago and who he was now had a measurable quality, like air pressure dropping before a storm. He looked at Elena. He did not look at Gerald. You've been building this for 4 years, he said. I've been protecting myself for 4 years, she said. That's different. From where I'm standing, I know where you're standing, she said. I've been standing in rooms that you built, Adrian, for 12 years. I know every angle. She looked at him without anger. She was too tired for anger, and besides, anger was a thing that connected you to the person you were angry at, and she was done being connected to him by anything except Sophie. I don't want to destroy you. I want you to understand that. Whatever you think I've been doing, that was never the goal. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his eyes. Not the performance, the thing underneath. The thing that Robert Fielding had known about for 23 years. The distance between who Adrian was and who he'd been pretending to be. The DA, he said. The DA is going to receive documentation of 5 fraudulent guarantee instruments, she said. That's already in motion. What I control is what they receive, and when and how completely. That's what we're negotiating. She paused. Full disclosure of every hidden asset, every instrument under my name removed and voided. Sophie's instrument voided and permanently sealed. Marcus Vell's cooperation formally recognized and protected. She looked at him with the steady, unblinking directness of someone who has nothing left to pretend. Give me those things, Adrian. Give them to me today, and I will make sure what goes to the DA is accurate and nothing more. His jaw worked. He looked at the floor. He looked at the wall. He looked at his own hands the way she'd looked at hers earlier in the morning. The gesture of someone checking that they're still present. If I give you that, he said, everything I've built. I know, she said. It doesn't survive this. I know that too. He looked at her, and in the look was something she had not expected to find after everything. A kind of grief. Not for her, not for Sophie. For the version of himself he'd been trying to maintain with so much infrastructure for so long that the maintenance had become indistinguishable from the person. Elena, he said. I know, she said quietly, and she meant it, in the way you mean things that cost you something to mean. He looked at the floor one more time. Then he looked at Gerald. Get Briscoe, he said. Diquette. The negotiation took 4 hours. It happened in a smaller conference room 2 floors down from Meridian Advisors, at a round table that had no head, which was either an accident of furniture or someone's idea of symbolism. Briscoe and 2 associates across from Gerald and Hartman, with Elena and Damien present but largely silent. The particular silence of principals who have established what they want and are now watching the technical machinery of their attorneys converted into enforceable language. Elena drank 3 cups of bad coffee and ate half a sandwich that someone ordered for the table and didn't track who. She read every draft paragraph Gerald passed to her. She made 3 corrections, each one small, each one precise, and Gerald incorporated them without question. At 1:45 in the afternoon, Briscoe passed a draft across the table. Gerald read it. He passed it to Elena. She read it. Everything was there. Every item she had asked for in the hallway, plus one she hadn't known to ask for. Hartman had included, in language she recognized as Damien's construction, a clause that prohibited cross-development from initiating any future legal or financial action against Elena, Sophie, or any Viscari Group entity in connection with the 5 projects. She looked up at Damien across the table. He was looking at the window, not at her. She looked back at the draft. She turned to the last page, the signature line. Her hand, when she picked up the pen, was steady. She signed, and she heard, from very far away, like the sound of something that has been held taut for 4 years finally going slack. Not a snap, but a release. The quiet, enormous sound of it being over. Except it wasn't over, because Gerald's phone in the breast pocket of his jacket lit up. He glanced at it. He went still in the way he went still when something was wrong. He looked at Elena. "It's Portia," he said. Portia, his contact at the county court clerk's office. "She says there's been a new filing." He read from the screen. His face did a thing she had never seen it do in 11 months, a brief, undisguised shock that he didn't have time to manage before she saw it. "Adrian filed a custody modification petition this morning," Gerald said, "before the creditor meeting, before the courthouse. It was filed at 7:41 a.m. He looked up. "He's seeking primary physical custody of Sophie." Elena heard the room, the fluorescent lights, the HVAC system, someone's chair moving slightly on the carpet. Briscoe, across the table, looking at the document in front of her with an expression that was either surprise or a very convincing performance of surprise. She looked at Adrian. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the table, with the specific, deliberate focus of a man who has played the last card in his hand and is waiting to see what it costs him. Elena set down the pen. She looked at him for a long time. The settlement document sat between them on the table, signed on her side and not yet signed on his, and the 4 hours of careful, exhausting negotiation sat on top of it like a weight, and underneath all of it was Sophie, age 7, with her tiger in a thunderstorm and her striped sock, and the serious expression of a child trying to determine whether the adults around her were telling the truth. "Adrian," Elena said. He looked up. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than anything she'd said all day, and it was the most dangerous thing in the room. "Sign the document," she said. Adrian looked at her for a long time. The conference room held its breath. The fluorescent lights hummed their indifferent hum. Briscoe sat across the table with her hands folded and her face arranged into the careful neutrality of an attorney who has just learned that her client has done something she was not informed of, and who is processing the professional implications of that discovery in real time. Gerald was very still beside Elena. Hartman had his pen down. Damien, at the far end of the table, had not moved, but Elena could feel the quality of his attention shift. The way a room shifts when the person in it with the most stillness becomes even stiller. Adrian's eyes were on Elena. She held them. She knew his face. 12 years of mornings and dinners and arguments conducted in the careful, civilized register of people who have stopped shouting but haven't stopped fighting. 12 years had given her a fluency in the specific language of his expressions that no one else in this room possessed. She knew the difference between his thinking face and his performing face. She knew the face he made when he was genuinely uncertain, which was rare, and the face he made when he wanted you to think he was uncertain, which was more common. She knew the face he made in the moments before he decided something. She was watching him decide something now. "The custody petition," Gerald said very quietly, to no one in particular. "Filed at 7:41 this morning, before the creditor meeting, before the courthouse." He let that sit for a moment. "That means it was prepared yesterday at the latest," Briscoe said, in a voice that had gone careful and precise in the way voices go when attorneys are managing information they don't want to mishandle. "I was not aware of the petition." "I know," Adrian said. The first words he'd spoken in several minutes. He said them to the table, not to Briscoe. "Adrian?" Her voice sharpened. "I need to know. I filed it through separate counsel, he said. You weren't involved. The silence that followed this disclosure had several layers. The top layer was professional. Briscoe recalibrating, Adrian's associates exchanging glances, Hartman writing something on his notepad. Underneath that was something more personal. The particular quiet of a room where someone has just revealed they were operating on multiple tracks simultaneously, and everyone is now revising their understanding of the last several hours. Elena understood it immediately. The custody petition was not a reaction to the creditor meeting. It was not a reaction to this morning's hearing. It had been prepared the previous day, before any of this morning's developments, which meant that Adrian had walked into the Harwick Tower this morning already holding it. He had sat across from her for 4 hours of negotiation with his signature on a custody petition in a filing system at the county family court, and he had said nothing. It was the backup, the thing you use when everything else fails. Elena breathed in through her nose. She looked at the settlement document between them on the table. She looked at the signature line, blank on his side, clean on hers. Then she looked at him. You filed for primary custody of Sophie, she said. Her voice was level in the way that very cold water is level, still, but with a temperature. Yes. On what grounds? He looked at her then, and in his eyes was something she had not expected to find after everything, after the fabricated emails and the forged signatures and the child's name on a development instrument, something that was not strategy, not performance, something that was simply human and small, and in its smallness, more difficult to look at than anything else had been all day. I don't want to lose her, he said. The room heard this differently than it heard everything else, not as a legal position, as a fact. Elena felt it land. She did not let it move her, not visibly, not yet, but she felt it land with the specific weight of true things, the weight that distinguishes them from the things people say in negotiating rooms when they are trying to get what they want. You used her name on a financial instrument, Elena said. You put your 7-year-old daughter's name on a debt guarantee for a failing real estate project. I know what I did. Do you? Yes. And his voice, for the first time since the morning, had no construction in it. No strategy. Just the flat, exhausted sound of a man who has run out of the architecture that usually holds him together. I know exactly what I did. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, Withdraw the petition. He looked at the table. Adrian, not loud, not threatening, the way you speak to someone when you want them to hear you clearly through everything else. Withdraw the petition, sign the settlement, and I will make sure that Sophie grows up knowing her father was complicated, not that he was a criminal. The words sat in the room. Briscoe made a small sound, not protest. Something closer to acknowledgement. Adrian pressed his fingers against the table surface. She could see the pressure in his fingertips, the white at the knuckle beds. He was holding onto the table the way people hold onto things when they are standing somewhere high and uncertain. Then he picked up the pen. He signed the settlement document. He set the pen down. He took out his phone. He made a call that lasted 40 seconds. When he ended it, he set the phone on the table and said, The petition has been withdrawn. Gerald immediately made his own call to verify. 40 seconds. He nodded. The settlement document sat on the table between them, signed on both sides, and the room let out whatever it had been holding. Elena left the Harwick Tower at 3:27 in the afternoon. She came out through the lobby into the gray October afternoon and stopped on the sidewalk and let the city do what it always did. Move around her with its noise and its indifference and its complete lack of interest in what had just happened on the 27th floor of the building behind her. A bus went past. 2 people walked by arguing about something she didn't catch. A food cart operator on the corner was wrapping up for the day, collapsing the umbrella with practiced efficiency. She stood there for a moment and let herself feel the outside air. Gerald came out behind her, buttoning his coat. He stood beside her and looked at the street. He didn't say anything immediately, which was one of the things she valued most about him. His understanding that sometimes the space after a thing is as important as the thing itself. It'll take the court several weeks to formally process everything, he said finally. The forensic review, the settlement modifications, the DA referral. There will be paperwork. I know, she said. Marcus Vell's attorney called while we were finishing. He's going to cooperate fully. His protected status is in the settlement terms. Good. The DA's office will likely want to speak with you at some point. Not urgently, but at some point. Okay. Gerald was quiet for another moment. You did something extraordinary today, he said. He said it in the same dry, precise tone he used for everything, which somehow made it more rather than less. We did, she said. He made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite argument. The sound of a 71-year-old man who has been in law for 50 years and knows the difference between a team effort and the particular thing that one person carries that cannot be distributed. He put on his gloves. He looked at the street. Go see your daughter, he said. He flagged a cab and got in it and was gone. Dana was waiting near the building entrance with her rolling cart and her laptop bag and the portable printer folded under her arm. She looked at Elena with the expression of someone who has spent 8 hours running at high intensity and is now experiencing the particular uncomfortable decompression of that intensity, suddenly having nowhere to go. It's done? Dana said. It's done, Elena said. Dana exhaled, a long, controlled breath that she'd been storing for a while. Okay, she said. Then, the server verification report. I'm going to write up a formal analysis for the DA referral. The metadata trail is clean. It'll hold. Thank you, Elena said. For everything. The 48 hours, the boxes, the portable printer. Dana looked at the printer under her arm. I always carry it, she said, with the slight, tired dignity of a professional who has learned from experience. You never know. She went to find her own car. Damien found Elena on the sidewalk 2 minutes later. He came out of the building alone. The security man had materialized somewhere behind him at a distance that was close enough to be present and far enough to be invisible. And he stopped beside her on the sidewalk with his hands in the pockets of his overcoat and looked at the street the same way she was looking at it, which was without destination, just looking. They stood there for a moment without speaking. The creditor vote? Elena said finally. Vasquez. You said we'd discuss his relationship with Cross later. We will, Damien said. That's a separate matter. His conduct today is something my attorneys will address with the creditor bank. It won't affect what was settled. But it's not finished. In my world, he said, some things are a long time finishing. He said it without heat, as a statement of the geography he inhabited. She looked at him. Are you going to be okay? Disclosing the due diligence failure on Westline. He considered the question seriously. It's a reputational issue, not a legal one. The investment is clean. The failure was internal, and it's been corrected. He paused. I've had reputational issues before. I imagine you have. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The more significant issue is that someone in Cross's organization knew enough about my review process to time the instrument insertion to survive it. He was looking at the street, but his focus was elsewhere, on the architecture of the thing, examining it. That required inside information. Elena turned to look at him. Someone in your organization? Someone who was, at one point, in my organization, he said. We've identified the individual. It's being handled. She didn't ask how. It wasn't her domain, and she understood the boundary without needing it stated. The letter I sent, she said. You received it the same day. Yes. And you verified everything before you came to the courthouse. I had 3 days. You could have handled it differently, she said. You could have addressed it without involving yourself in the hearing, filed the motion through Hartman only, kept your distance from the visible part of it. He turned to look at her then, the dark eyes, the particular quality of attention. Yes, he said. Why didn't you? A pause. The kind of pause he used when he was deciding how honest to be, which was different from most people's pauses because his honesty, when it came, was never theatrical. Because the letter you sent me was the most precisely written document I'd received in a decade, he said, and I wanted to know who wrote it. He looked at her steadily. And because what Cross did to you was something I understood needed to be answered in person, not through a motion filing. She held his gaze. That's not entirely a financial interest calculation. No, he said. It isn't. The city moved around them. The bus stop on the corner was collecting its afternoon crowd. Someone nearby was cooking something with garlic, and the smell drifted past and disappeared. The light changed and changed again. "What happens now?" Elena said. She meant it practically. The legal timeline, the DA process, the settlement implementation. But she also meant it in the way that people sometimes mean questions that are larger than their practical surface. Damien understood both. "The legal machinery runs for several weeks," he said. "The settlement terms are enforced. The DA process moves at its own pace, which will have nothing to do with your timeline." He paused. "Cross-development will not survive the combination of the Calder South default, the West Line complications, and the fraud investigation. The company will likely go into some form of restructuring within 6 months. And Adrian personally. That depends on the DA and on how his attorneys manage the cooperation question." He looked at the street. "He won't go to prison. His attorneys are too good and his cooperation will be too useful. But the version of Adrian Cross that existed yesterday morning no longer exists." Elena thought about the look on Adrian's face when he'd said, "I don't want to lose her," the smallness of it, the truth of it, mixed with everything else, the fraud and the manipulation and the 12 years of careful architecture designed to keep him elevated above the consequences of his own choices. "He loves Sophie," she said. "Yes," Damien said, without elaborating, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. "That matters to me," Elena said. "Not for him, for her. She's going to need to understand her father without being destroyed by understanding him. She stopped. "That's going to take a long time." "It usually does," he said, not with the authority of personal experience he intended to share, but with the simple recognition of someone who had watched human beings manage the complicated aftermath of difficult truths for a long time. Elena looked at the sky. The gray had thinned a little in the west, where the afternoon was doing something tentative with the light. "I'm driving to Dunmore," she said, "to see Sophie." "Tonight?" "Right now. As soon as I go back to the apartment for my car." She paused. "I told her I'd come when it was done." "Then go," he said. She looked at him. She thought about the 90 seconds at a gala 4 years ago, and the letters sent through a courier service, and the black car at Gerald's door at 7 in the morning, and the moment in the courthouse when he'd walked through the doors and she'd said, "He's here for me," to a room full of people who hadn't understood what they were seeing. She thought about the way he'd said "we" in a text message at 5:30 in the morning, where it hadn't been before. "I don't know what to do with—" She gestured slightly, meaning all of it, meaning the undefined space between a financial interest and whatever this was. "I don't know what this is." "You don't have to know today," he said. "I'm aware of that," she said. "I just wanted to say it out loud." He looked at her with the same quality of attention he'd given everything today, full and unrushed, without the performance of patience, just the genuine article. "When you've seen your daughter," he said, "and you've slept, and the paperwork has settled, if you want to have a conversation about what this is, I'll be available for that conversation." "And if I decide I don't?" she said. "Then you've decided," he said, and the investment position was still worth protecting. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "You're a complicated man." "Yes," he said, without apology and without pride, just acknowledgement. She picked up her bag. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder. She looked at him once more, the dark overcoat, the silver-streaked hair, the particular quality of stillness. And then she turned and walked toward the parking structure 2 blocks away. She did not look back. Not from pride, not from performance. Because she had spent 4 years looking back at things she couldn't change, and she was done with that direction. The drive to Dunmore took 2 hours and 11 minutes. Elena drove with the radio off. She'd tried it for the first 20 minutes, news, music, anything, but everything she put on felt like noise from a different frequency than the one she was operating on. So she turned it off and drove in the quiet with just the engine and the road and the October landscape moving past on both sides. She crossed the Bel Air Bridge at mile 40 and watched the river below catch the late afternoon light and give it back in pieces. She stopped for gas at a station outside of Millhaven and stood at the pump in the cold and felt the specific, honest tiredness of a body that had been running on adrenaline since 4:43 that morning and was now beginning to present the bill. Her shoulders ached. Her eyes felt dry and slightly too large for their sockets. Her hands, when she looked at them on the steering wheel, had a faint, persistent tremor that she recognized as the physical residue of sustained high-stakes tension and knew would pass with sleep. She thought about what she would say to Sophie, not the legal details, not the fraud, not the custody petition, not the settlement. Sophie was 7. Sophie needed her mother to arrive at her aunt's house in Dunmore and hold her and be present in the full, undivided way that the last several weeks had made difficult. But Sophie also, someday, not today, not soon, but someday, was going to ask questions about the divorce, about her father, about why things had changed and what had happened in the months before they changed. And Elena wanted to be ready for those questions with answers that were honest without being weaponized. That told the truth about Adrian without making Sophie feel that half of herself was something to be ashamed of. That was the long work. The work that didn't have a settlement document or a forensic verification or a creditor meeting. The work that just went on, quietly, in the daily accumulation of small moments, a drive to Dunmore, a conversation at a kitchen table, a bedtime where you held someone small and let the fact of holding them be sufficient. She thought about Gerald saying, "Go see your daughter." She thought about Damien saying, "Then go." She thought about the water stain on the ceiling of the apartment on Crestfield Avenue and putting her feet on the cold floor and the daily, unglamorous practice of continuing. Her sister's house was a white Cape Cod on a street of similar houses, with a yard that had a swing set that Sophie had claimed as her own personal territory and a maple tree in the corner that was currently doing something spectacular with the October light, its remaining leaves a color between copper and fire that made Elena, turning into the driveway, catch her breath. The front door opened before she'd gotten out of the car. Sophie came down the porch steps in socks, which Elena's sister was going to be exasperated about because it had rained the night before and the steps were still damp, and she crossed the small yard at the running speed of a 7-year-old who has spotted the person she has been waiting for and has no interest in moderating her approach. Elena got out of the car and crouched down, and Sophie hit her at full speed, arms around her neck, the specific weight and warmth of a child who trusts you completely and demonstrates it physically. All of it, no reservation, no held-back portion. Elena held on. She pressed her face into Sophie's hair, which smelled like the particular combination of her sister's shampoo and something outside and the indefinable warmth of child, and she held on with both arms and felt the day. The whole enormous day, from 4:43 in the morning, to the courthouse, to the creditor meeting, to the conference room, and Adrian's face when he signed and the drive through the October landscape. Felt all of it settle and subside, the way floodwater recedes, slowly and then completely, leaving the ground changed but present. "You came," Sophie said. Her voice was muffled by Elena's shoulder. "I came," Elena said. "Is it done?" Elena pulled back to look at her. Sophie's face was serious and watchful, the way it got when she was asking a question she'd been holding for a while. Her hair had escaped whatever her aunt had done with it, and was making the curly shapes that Elena's was making in the drawing taped to the wall of the Crestfield apartment. "It's done," Elena said. Sophie looked at her face the way she always did, the 7-year-old truth detector, checking the gap between what adults said and what was actually true. Elena let her look. There was nothing to hide. "Okay," Sophie said. And then, immediately, with the beautiful completeness of a child's priority system, "Brutus ate my other sock." Elena laughed. It came out of her freely, without the strange scraping quality of the laugh 10 days ago that had felt like an unused muscle. This one was full and immediate, and Sophie, hearing it, laughed too, and they were both laughing on the wet lawn in the October afternoon about a dog and a sock, which was the right way to begin the rest of things. Elena's sister, whose name was Renata and who had been, throughout all of this, the kind of practical, unsentimental support that Elena needed more than any other kind, fed them dinner and kept the conversation light, and watched Elena with the particular attention of an older sister who has her own very accurate truth detector and was running it the whole evening. After Sophie was asleep, she had lasted until 8:15, which was longer than Renata had expected, powered by the specific energy of Elena's arrival. The two of them sat at the kitchen table with decaffeinated coffee and the comfortable silence of people who had known each other long enough that silence didn't require management. "Tell me," Renata said. Elena told her. Not everything. Not the granular legal details, not the specifics of the Viscari Group involvement, not the metadata and the server logs and the 4 hours of settlement negotiation. The shape of it. The arc from the storage room 4 years ago to the courthouse this morning to the conference room this afternoon. Renata listened without interrupting, which was something she'd learned to do over the years and which Elena appreciated more than Renata probably knew. When Elena finished, Renata sat with it for a moment. She turned her coffee cup a quarter turn on the table. She said, "He put Sophie's name on it." "Yes." Renata looked at the table. Her jaw worked briefly. Then she said, with the flat, controlled delivery of someone managing genuine anger with competent effort, "Okay." "I know," Elena said. "I'm not going to say what I want to say about that." "I know. Because you're handling it and it's done." "Yes." Renata turned the cup another quarter turn. "This man, Viscari." Elena looked at her coffee. "What about him?" "You said he came to the courthouse." "Yes." "And he was at the creditor meeting." "Yes." "And his people ran the due diligence trace and identified the full scope of it." "Yes." Renata looked at her. "And?" "And nothing," Elena said. "Not yet." Renata made a sound, not quite skeptical, not quite satisfied. The sound of an older sister filing information for later use. "He said that if I want to have a conversation about what it is," Elena said carefully, "he'll be available for that conversation." "And if you don't want to?" "Then I've decided, and the investment position was still worth protecting." She paused. He said it just like that. Renata was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I like that." "I know," Elena said. "So do I." She slept in the guest room that night with the door cracked in case Sophie needed her, and she slept deeply and without the sudden surfacing that had been waking her at 4-something every morning for months. She woke at 6:41 to the sound of Brutus moving around somewhere in the house, his nails on the hardwood floor, and she lay still for a moment and took inventory. The settlement was signed. The forensic review was in process. Sophie was in the room down the hall. The custody petition was withdrawn. Her name was on documents only where she had chosen to put it. She lay there in the gray morning light of the guest room and let these things be true, one at a time, without reaching for the next problem. There would be more problems. The DA process would require her attention. The settlement implementation would have friction. Adrian's restructuring would produce complications she couldn't fully anticipate. Marcus Vell's cooperation would need to be protected as the legal machinery moved. Damien Viscari existed, and whatever that meant for the long term was something she would have to figure out in the long term, carefully, without the urgency of crisis pushing her toward decisions that needed to be made in a different register. There would be more problems, but the problems ahead of her were different in character from the ones behind her, because the ones ahead were real problems, not the manufactured impossibility of trying to survive a situation designed to eliminate her options, but the ordinary, navigable difficulty of continuing. She could work with that. She had always been able to work with that. She got up. She put her feet on the floor. Not the cold floor of the Crestfield apartment, but the old wooden floor of the guest room in Renata's house in Dunmore, slightly warmer, slightly softer with age. She pressed both feet flat and felt the solidity of the thing beneath her. She went to the kitchen and made coffee. At 7:15, Sophie appeared in the doorway in her pajamas with her hair doing what it always did in the morning, which was refuse to cooperate with anything. She had Brutus at her side. The dog had apparently decided that wherever Sophie went, he went, which Renata found both endearing and logistically complicated. Sophie looked at Elena at the kitchen counter with the clear, uncomplicated assessment of someone who is 7 and has just woken up and requires only the presence of the person she was looking for. "You're still here," she said. "I'm still here," Elena said. Sophie crossed the kitchen and climbed onto the stool at the counter and looked at the coffee Elena was making with the considered expression of someone evaluating a process they don't yet understand, but intend to eventually. Brutus settled under the stool with a sound that was close to a sigh. "Can we go to the park today?" Sophie said. "Yes," Elena said. "The one with the bridge." "Yes." Sophie seemed to find this satisfactory. She propped her chin on her hands on the counter and watched Elena pour the coffee. She said, "Are you happy?" Elena looked at her. The curly hair, the serious eyes, the direct question delivered without preamble in the way that children ask the questions adults spend years building elaborate approaches to. She thought about the water stain on the ceiling, about the storage room and the manila folder, and the moment of standing very still while the hum of the house surrounded her and understanding exactly what she was looking at. She thought about Gerald's kitchen at 7 in the morning, and the car through downtown traffic, and the courthouse, and the conference room, and the settlement document, and the drive through the October landscape with the radio off, and the copper fire maple tree in the corner of Renata's yard. She thought about the 90 seconds at a gala, and a letter, and a man in a dark overcoat walking through courthouse doors. She thought about the woman who had signed 41 pages of a settlement agreement with calm, steady hands, and let a room full of people believe she had accepted defeat. She thought about what it had taken to be that woman. Not the composure was the easy part, but the long, sustained, invisible work of it. The 11 months of getting up and putting her feet on the cold floor and continuing in the direction of a thing she couldn't be certain would work. It had worked. Not cleanly, not without cost. There was no version of the story where everything was recovered and nothing was lost. Adrian was a complicated truth that Sophie would carry for the rest of her life, and Elena had spent 4 years in a situation that had taken something from her that the settlement couldn't give back, and the road ahead was long and would require things from her that she couldn't yet name. Nothing about any of it was simple or clean or without residue. But she was here. Sophie was here. The floor was under her feet and the coffee was in her hand and the maple tree was visible from the kitchen window, still doing its extraordinary October thing with the morning light. "Yes," Elena said. "I'm happy." Sophie looked at her for a moment with the truth detector running, checking the gap. She found no gap. "Good," Sophie said with the decisive satisfaction of someone who has received the answer they were hoping for and is now ready to move on to the park with the bridge. "Can Brutus come?" "Brutus can definitely come," Elena said. She poured her coffee and looked out the window at the maple tree and the morning light on it, and she let herself stand in the ordinary, unremarkable, sufficient fact of a Tuesday morning in October in a kitchen that was not hers, but held people she loved, with everything that needed to be finished, finally finished, and everything that needed to continue still ahead of her. She had walked into a courthouse believing everyone saw a woman who had lost everything. She had spent 4 years in a silence that everyone interpreted as surrender. She had built something in the dark, without witnesses, without certainty, in the early mornings before her library shifts and the late evenings after Sophie's calls about the dog and the sock, and she had carried it alone for long enough that she had stopped thinking of the weight as unusual and started thinking of it as weather. And then the weather had changed. The morning light shifted on the maple tree. Brutus thumped his tail once against the floor under the stool. Sophie was already explaining, to no one in particular, the specific bridge at the specific park and why it was the best bridge, and her voice filled the kitchen with the ordinary music of a child certain of her opinions. Elena drank her coffee. She looked at her daughter. She looked at the light. She let it be enough, because it was, because it had always been, underneath everything, the actual thing. Not the victory, not the vindication, not the moment in the courthouse when the room understood what it was looking at. Those mattered. She would not diminish them, but they were not the thing itself. The thing itself was this: a kitchen, a morning, a child asking about a bridge. Elena Vaughn had learned, in 4 years of doing the invisible work, that survival was not the dramatic moment of winning. It was every morning before it, every cold floor, every early cup of coffee, every day of continuing when continuing was all you had. She had continued. And here was the morning on the other side of it, unremarkable and irreplaceable, exactly as it was. She finished her coffee. She set the cup down. She went to find her coat.